Is it a big deal if Auburn doesn't get any wide receivers via the transfer portal?
Well, Zach, I actually just finished crushing some chicken farm, and I am freaking ready to rock and roll.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. And joining me as he does most Wednesdays for a little War Report Wednesday action, Mike G. And we're going to talk about Auburn guys in the NFL draft in a moment. But I hopped on a Facts or Not, which is a weekly segment you guys have been doing for years. Earlier this week, had a blast. Thank you for the invitation. But one of the questions or statements, I guess, that was posed, and we had to decide if it was a fact or not, was Auburn will not add any wide receivers via the transfer portal.
Oof.
Most of us said nah, myself included. You said
That's a fact.
they would, right?
Yeah, that's a fact.
You said they would add guys via the transfer portal. I said no. When is this coming? If you believe that they are going to add receivers via the portal, when do you think that happens?
Well, we're officially in the post-spring ball era. So just about everybody. I don't think there's anybody who hasn't had their spring game after this past weekend. Yeah. So now that everybody has had their spring game, there is a short period of time, as I understand it, for guys to actually get into the portal. So between now and May 1st, you got to get into the portal regardless of whether you're staying or going. You can transfer anywhere you want to, but there is a dead period this summer where guys cannot get into the portal. So the guys have to enter the portal before the dead period and then figure out where they're going to play, hopefully sooner rather than later this fall.
Yeah. And it's so early in this portal era of college football. So I guess we don't know this for a fact, but I think common sense gets us there, where it's like the earlier you transfer to your new destination, the better.
Right.
I mean, as far as scholarships available, as far as, if you're in a position of need, like you don't want to be the second or third guy that they add because you want to understand what you're going into. So you got to think over the next few weeks, we're going to start to see some of these guys transfer in and pick Auburn. Because look, people should not be freaking out with the departures. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree.
But it is okay for you to be concerned with the lack of bodies that Auburn has added during this offseason.
Yeah, I just think people are nervous about what they haven't seen. And what the state that Auburn's wide receiver room is in right now is that there's not a ton of experience in that room. So, people are nervous about going with the guys that we have. So they think, we have to go out and get somebody. That's that's why they went out and got Robertson last year. You go out and you get a guy who's got experience, and he came in and he started over guys that we had in our room. Now we're kind of moving past that. Like if we're saying year one, there were a lot of unknowns. Now this staff has spent a whole year with these kids. So I don't think that I think they'll add somebody, but not out of desperation and not because they feel like the room is weak. You got to go out and you got to find somebody. If you're bringing in somebody now, you got to bring in a game changer. I don't know if they'll be able to do that, but if you have the scholarships available, it might not be a bad idea to go out and get a guy, especially if he's bringing in experience. So they would be remiss if they didn't at least take a look at that. I do expect them to do that. And it's important for everybody to remember coaches are doing player evals right now post-spring. So a lot of guys are finding out where they stand going into the fall. Some of that is going to be not so great news for some of those guys. Now, do we want another program's rejects, so to speak? I hate calling them rejects, but, at the end of the day, if they are getting bad news about where they stand with their program and they're looking to transfer, one might stand to reason that those evals weren't good. And that player may be looking to prove that coach wrong by going someplace else, or they're just not happy for some other reasons. I just know they have to do it quickly to avoid this dead period, and then they can transfer wherever they want after that. So coaches are going through player evals right now. Players are going to figure out where they stand and use that information to make a decision about whether they want to stay or go.
Right. Yeah. So I'm in the camp that they will not add a transfer wide receiver this offseason because, like you said, if they were to go in and add a game changer, I think that's something. But I don't think that's going to happen for most teams at this point in the process. I think all of the game changers have already been decided, right? I think those guys have been divvied up across the landscape of college football. And so now what I think you're going to see are these dudes who are redshirt freshmen or redshirt sophomores, and it's essentially like you getting a recruit, but has played in a college system for a few seasons, maybe not played, but gone through practices and film evaluations and things like that. And you're getting guys that could possibly make an impact in 2024, maybe 2023. But the wide receiver situation, I don't think you need that because I think the future of the position is really, really good. Guys like Tavares Dawson's young, Malcolm Johnson Jr.'s young, Jay Fair's young, and you know the list goes on and on. It's like the future of that position, I think, is fine. But where I think you're going to see it is with offensive linemen that aren't going to play this season, but you're going to have to totally revamp that whole unit after this offseason for the most part. Same with the defensive front. And so I think those are the positions that you're going to see Auburn get a bunch of guys in, but not necessarily to play this season, but to say, okay, in 2023, you've got a chance to be a starter.
Yeah, I think that's a fair take. Listen, they have no reason to believe that the cupboard is empty at wide receiver. It's really only fans that feel that way because it's production that they haven't seen yet. Right. But the coaches are evaluating these guys. I go back to, one of the earlier points about now they've had a whole year with these kids. So they know exactly what they have. And if you're bringing in a guy, he needs to add value immediately because it sends a message to the kids that you're developing as well, that they may not be ready yet when you go out and you bring a guy in just to add depth, but he's not a game changer of some sort. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, you go out and you get a top receiver from another school, like he led the SEC, and that guy comes into Auburn. It's like, okay, well, they just brought in a guy who's obviously going to start because he led the SEC in receiving yards the previous year and was a complete game changer, but was unhappy where he was for some reason. That doesn't necessarily mess up the chemistry of your room because if you get a chance to get a guy like that, you take that kid. And, former players like Chris Todd have told us repeatedly, the coaches are always trying to bring in somebody who's better than you. So you have to continue to fight for your spot and show them why you belong on the top of that mountain. Do I think they'll do that this offseason? Yes, I absolutely do think they'll do that if that person is available. We just never know who's going to be available, and we're going to find out over the next few days.
Yeah, I think that's well said. All right, I want to dive into the names you need to know when watching the NFL draft this weekend from an Auburn Tiger standpoint. But look, Mike G brought up a good point just a second ago with coaches always wanting to bring in players that are better than you. Built Bar is doing the same thing. They're constantly trying to bring in flavors that are even better than what you've experienced before. And I mean, they keep setting the bar higher and higher and higher and higher. And I mean, with some of the things they have going on right now, a peanut butter and chocolate granola Built Bar. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Sounds delicious. I have not tried one yet. I plan on ordering one later this evening, or a box rather, not just one bar, because I know I'm going to want more than that. I want a full box, baby. Let's go. But seriously, all of these Built Bars are delicious. They're all covered 100% in chocolate, and they all have about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein to keep you full, and they are fantastic. Go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off. That is at Built.com. Mike G, before we jump into NFL draft talk, what else going on at the War Report these days?
Not much. It's just the off season. So, of course, we're working hard over at the War Report. We got tons of patron content for you guys right now. We are putting out things on podcasts. We have podcast only content. So It's the off season. We're engaging right now. We're trying to figure out some things. We've got great interviews going on over at the War Report. We just interviewed Robbie Ashford. he came to give us his post-spring analysis of all things Auburn football. So lots of great stuff over there. Go subscribe, give us a listen.
What was the biggest takeaway from talking to him post-spring? Because you guys talked to him pre-spring. What was the biggest takeaway post-spring?
Apparently, we got a bunch of sub 4 or 5 guys on this team. I asked him, who's the fastest guy on this team? And
you just wanted him to say Malcolm Johnson Jr. That's all you wanted him to say.
And he said Shed Jackson. That's the first name that came out of his mouth was Shedrick Jackson.
When you talk about speed, really?
Yeah. And I was like, okay. But I kept, he was just like, I don't know, man. You're trying to get me in trouble, Mike, by asking this question. And he went through and he talked about all the guys. He said, God, we got so many guys. It's such a hard. I asked him to name top 3 fastest. And he was having a hard time with that because he thinks they got speed everywhere.
But he said Shedrick Jackson. I love that.
Shed is one of the fastest on the team.
There's part of Shed's game that I like. I just don't think he's used correctly. And I think that's a personnel issue, not a coaching staff issue. I think they're doing what's the best case scenario for the team. But man, if if Demetrius Robertson would have been a little bit better last year, especially as like an outside guy, I think Shed would have been tremendous on the other side of it. But when he's asked to be the number 1 guy, I just don't think it really works. And it's weird because Auburn's receiving attack was like inside out last year when I think it needs to be outside in. And so I just think that kind of hurts Shed when it comes down to it. So
Agreed.
And I don't think it's going to change because I think you look at the guys that have the most upside. They're all slot dudes, with the exception of maybe Malcolm Johnson Jr. I think he could be relevant on the outside. So maybe that'll help Shed out. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, it's all about how we use him. And I'll be interested to see what kind of chemistry he has developed as the most experienced returning receiver with the quarterbacks that we have in our room right now. Now, we didn't get a good look at Zach Calzada. I spent some time looking at his Texas A&M highlights from last year, and man, I still think he's going to factor into this race in the fall.
No question. Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see. All right. Let's talk about the NFL draft. So as far as expectations from your point of view, Roger McCreary will probably not be taken Thursday night. He will be taken Friday night. I feel pretty strongly and confident saying that he will be probably a 2nd round pick, but he's not going to slide out of the 3rd round there. So what do you think that means from a program point of view when you don't have a 1st round pick and you only probably have 1 guy going in the 2nd day of the draft?
Sounds pretty par for the course. So, like, in terms of draft picks, I mean, it sounds a lot like last year, right?
Well, say what you want about Gus, but in the thick of his tenure, he was getting guys drafted at a higher rate than anybody in the history of the program.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, I think
that's a number. Like, there's no arguing to that. Like, that was happening,
Yeah, I mean, but if you look at his years versus the Tuberville years, it's like 3 more guys with much higher rated recruits than what Tuberville brought in. So, I mean, in comparing, I mean, it's not like Auburn has had a lot of stability at coach over the years as well, too. So we haven't exactly been running through coaches like some schools. Sure. And if you're talking about the last 3 longest tenured coaches, sure, he had more guys, but I would argue that Tuberville took he took much lower rated talent coming out of high school and produced almost just as many draft picks. I looked at the numbers a while back. I think it was like 36 to 34 or something like that. It was very close.
Interesting. Yeah. So I mean, we'll see. But as far as I mean, this doesn't need to be par for the course, though, right? I mean, we talked about this after signing day when Harsin was doing the whole with Auburn football, doing the whole like playing the NFL draft theme, and then him going up and reading it off of podium like they were drafting these players. And I think that's the vision that he's trying to sell is if you come to Auburn, we will get you into the league. And I think Auburn's going to have a bunch of dudes drafted higher next year. Everybody's focused on Tank being the first guy, and Tank probably will be a high draft pick, one of the higher running backs. I'm assuming he stays healthy, but like Colby Wooden's going to be a drafted player next year.
Yeah.
Michael Leota is going to be a drafted player next year. Derek Hall is going to be a drafted player next year. There's a chance that one of these corners pops off and they become a drafted player next year. There's a lot to like about where all of this is going. But this year, it's like, all right, you got Roger, who I think is going to go later than he should because his arms are 2 inches too short. He was a first-round pick going into the Senior Bowl week. Then he did all of his measurements, and they're like, oh, we don't like you anymore. I'm like, y'all are stupid. Y'all are so dumb.
Somebody's going to get a steal.
I think so. PFF put out a thing that like analytics say he has the highest chance to be like the steal of the draft, or like the best value pick of the draft. Or something.
I believe that. I 100% agree with that. I think that people get enamored with your standard measurables,
right?
How fast the guy runs, how high he jumps, how tall he is, how long his wingspan is. And sometimes they're just these guys who maybe don't have all those traditional measurables, but they have the things that are hard to measure with stats and rulers, right? Like they have heart and they've got the work ethic, and it's a whole process. So in the interviews that these guys do, it helps or hurt their draft prospects as well too. So if a team picking a certain spot interviews a guy and really likes him, he may move up draft boards as well. So that'll be part of the process as well, where, he may not have some of those measurables that stand out. He can impress teams with what's up here and move up draft boards. So I hope that happens for him.
Yeah. I just don't know how you watch the Iron Bowl and you're like, I don't want that guy on my team. That's just crazy to me.
It's talent eval. Zach, it's such an inexact science.
Totally. One
guy looks at people general managers, people get fired over this because they took, in any sport, if you think about it, you got a bunch of guys that are highly rated. And this is not a football example, but if you look at maybe like the draft that had Dwayne Wade and Carmelo Anthony and LeBron James.
Yeah.
The second pick in that draft was Darko Milicic.
That's right. Yeah.
Everybody around him turned into a literal franchise player. Mm-hmm. And the Pistons took Darko Milicic.
Right.
They somehow had the only miss in like the first 6 picks. Crazy, because they looked and they thought, oh, this guy projects as, one of the best in the NBA. And, Darko, I don't think he's playing basketball anymore. And those other guys are all Hall of Famers.
Sometimes it works. Sometimes the traits and the measurables, it's like, this guy's not good. And then 2 or 3 years later, they turn into a stud. And it's like, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a reason. Josh Allen. And I mean, there's a reason why they do all of these things. But
well, and every year there's some guy who comes out of nowhere that we never heard of. Like I couldn't have told you who Trey Lance was before last year's draft.
Yeah.
I had no clue who he was. And this guy's the top 5 pick in the NFL draft. Who was the other guy that came from
the BYU guy?
Yeah, no, it wasn't him because I knew about him.
Yeah. Wilson.
I knew about Wilson. There was Trey Lance. Wilson,
I don't know.
Maybe it was Trey Lance, right? But I think he came from like South Dakota State or just some school.
North Dakota State.
If you told me you were following that team last college football season, I'd have been like, yeah, right. Guys like Joe Flacco, who came from like Vermont or New Hampshire or someplace,
Delaware,
some obscure school, right? And I'm just thinking to myself, it is so hard to look at somebody and judge them. You have to take stats and film and interviews and all these things and make an educated guess on how a kid projects, right? And then if what players have told me, Devin Romashutu told us this. Mm-hmm. He said, listen, if you are taken in the first 3 rounds, they expect you to play by year 2 or 3.
Right.
Any kid taken after the first round, so in second and third round, you may not make the field year 1, but the expectation is that you will be able to contribute by year 2 and at latest year 3. Right. So they dig into every part of who this kid is. And I just think from what I know about Roger McCreary, if teams do their due diligence, somebody should take a flyer on him a lot higher than he may be projecting right now. So
yeah, we'll see. Yep, we will see. All right, other guys to watch. What about Smoke Monday? And then could another guy possibly get drafted? A lot of people think Zakoby McClain will go late. Could there be another one? We'll talk about that in just a moment. Today's show brought to you by rockauto.com. Look, I'm sure the NFL draft wishes the draft was like rockauto.com, where you need a part for your team. It's like, I would like to purchase a corner for super cheap by going to rockauto.com. They don't sell cornerbacks or any football position, but they do sell any part that you need for your automobile. Check it out at rockauto.com. The site is very easy to use and navigate, unlike the NFL draft. And so be sure to check them out anytime you need auto parts for your car, truck, or SUV. So go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available, right? Locked on Auburn in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. So the NFL appears to be higher on Smoke Monday than I expected them to be, Mike G. And so it sounds like Smoke's going to go early day 3. A lot of teams really, I guess analysts, I don't think we really know how teams feel yet, but a lot of draft analysts really like Smoke's traits, which surprises me a little bit just because he kind of got lost once he got farther and farther away from the line of scrimmage. But it seems like he's going to be taken fairly early on day 3.
Yeah, I am a little shocked at that too.
Yeah.
I thought he would be one of the harder players to project in this draft, certainly. And I expected him to be, if drafted at all, very low. So I'm pleasantly surprised to hear that he may kind of outperform expectations in this draft. He was inconsistent at Auburn. There were times where just blown coverages, and there were things that would make you scratch your head for a super senior. They get a different kind of tutelage at the next level.
Right.
Hopefully he spent the time this offseason, like once the season ends and you're going into draft, those guys immediately go to work out with somebody in preparation for the combine or pro day workouts. Right. And they really transform their bodies too in that 3-week period. I remember seeing players come back looking like they just got out of a Captain America super machine.
They look like you, Mike.
Exactly. Just a specimen, the absolute unit. But
Leota. But no, you're absolutely right. And so what does Smoke do there? And can he improve as a pass coverage safety? That'll be fun to see. And then Zakoby McClain is interesting. I've talked to some NFL draft folks that are like, yeah, I'm not even going to watch his tape because I don't think he's going to get drafted. But a lot of people and a lot of projections say he will get drafted sometime on day 3. I don't think he can be that good in pass coverage. He ran a faster 40 than I thought. What did you say? It was a 4.69, right? For his 40 at the combine. Yep. It's like, maybe that's enough. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, man, it's just so hard. When you're having these discussions, about these players, a 4.69, you had mentioned that was maybe faster than you were expecting. For linebackers, because they're getting faster, it's not uncommon to have linebackers around or sub 4.5 these days. So I wondered if 4.69 was too slow for him. Now, what we do know is that he was one of the best tacklers in college football over the last few years.
No question. Right.
Not a question. He was a tackling machine. So he had one of the lowest missed tackle rates. So, when he had a chance to make a tackle, he made it. And we were a different team with him in the game. I think that teams, when they look at film and see that, if you go back and you look at the first half of Georgia State, we were a different defense after Zakoby McClain came into that game.
You're right.
So it'll be really interesting to see how much of that they evaluate and say, this guy is who doesn't need a guy who never misses a tackle?
Yeah.
At times he did. There were times where he took bad angles, on tackles, and there were some things in his game that he needed to clean up. So
but you're going to see that with every college linebacker. So
for sure. Yeah. But
right. So those 3 guys will probably get taken. After that, let's say in this world, I tell you, I come from the future and I tell you, all right, 4 Auburn Tigers get drafted. Of course, you would say those 3. And then you have to pick the fourth one between Demetrius Robertson, TD Moultrie, Brodarious Ham, or Tony Fair. Who are you picking? I can go first while you're thinking if you want.
Yeah.
I would say Brodarious Ham. I think Bro Ham has we're talking about traits, and like there's some things I think we've seen NFL teams talk themselves into. I think his size is attractive. I think he's a very smart football player as far as the scheme. I've heard that when people talking about him. So there you go.
Man, I'm gonna have to go with you on that one.
Okay.
I think Brodarious Ham definitely lineman, because if the other options are Demetrius Robertson, I'm not sure that he projects as an NFL wide receiver based on what we've seen.
Yeah.
So I'd love to be wrong and see him at the next level. Yeah, I think that linemen, every team is in need of good linemen, and you need to be deep on the line as well, too. So in case of injury, there's no time in football where you never need a good lineman, right? So I would say Brodarious Ham definitely, and it's a developmental position as well, too.
Yeah,
where you can get them in the league, they can bulk them up, they can work on them, they can build them into an NFL lineman if they feel like enough of the foundational stuff is there.
Right. So one of my favorite draft guides that I get every year is the DTP's NFL draft guide. It's written by Daniel Parlagecko.
Okay.
He has Demetrius Robertson as the 36th wide receiver, which means he would get drafted if that was the case.
Okay.
But his argument's based off of like what he did at Cal and his traits, and he's got like breakaway speed. We didn't really see that opportunity at Auburn.
Okay.
So we'll see. We'll see if he does that. And then he has Zakoby as like the 6th inside linebacker, I think. So that would get him drafted as well. So there you go. There you go.
Going to be interesting to see. I mean, Harsin, I don't even know how much he can claim of these guys. Like, is this really his draft?
He would only be able to claim Robertson, right? If he were to get drafted, because that's the only guy that he acquired. So
yeah, and then it's a bunch of defensive guys. You know, again, if Ham for some reason goes, I just think these are numbers that we're going to have to work on in the future if you want to continue to attract top tier talent. You got to get guys in the league.
There, I mean, next year's Auburn class will be significantly more draftable, I think. So, Mike G, I hope you enjoy watching the draft this weekend, my friend. One more time, how can people find you, hear you, watch you, all that good stuff?
Just go on over to the War Report on YouTube, hit subscribe. We got tons of content there for you guys. Check out this week's Facts or No. And listen to your boy Zach Blackerby.
Special guest, Zach Blackerby. Yep.
Give fantastic answers to everything. So thanks for having me.
Of course, bud. Of course. All right, thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. For your second listen today, hop over to Locked On SEC. Chris Gordy's got a lot of good stuff going on. Or Locked On NFL Draft. Maybe they mentioned one of the Auburn guys that we talked about on their show today. We'll be back tomorrow right here on Locked On Auburn. See ya.